All right, in this video, we're going to talk about traditional versus relationship selling. And so this is basically how you need to think about it. So in every sell, there's basically four phases according to our textbook. So there's the approach, identifying needs, making the presentation, and then lastly, resistance and gaining commitment from your customer. So as you can see, the relationship model of selling takes the amount of time you spend in each phase and flips it. So, for example, in approach, you're spending 40% of your time building trust and rapport in the relationship model, while only 10% in the traditional model telling. Identifying needs, you're spending 30% of your time in the relationship model probing, asking questions, listening, and then in the traditional model, you're spending 20% qualifying. In the relationship model, you're spending 20% of your time selling benefits, whereas in the traditional model, you're spending 30% of your time presenting features. And then lastly, you're only spending 10% of your time reassuring and closing in the relationship model, whereas you're spending 40% of your time closing long and hard in the traditional model. So let's talk about why each of those phases require different amounts of time when you move from the traditional sales model into relationship selling. So start off with the approach, rapport building versus telling. So in the relationship model, basically what you're doing is you're spending time, you're getting to know the customer, you're finding out their needs and why they may or may not be interested in your product. In the traditional model, you're approaching them and you're basically telling them about who you are, your product, and introducing why you're going to try to sell to them. And so this makes a really big difference, as you'll see later on, because when you spend the time to build the relationship, you're able to focus and tailor your sales presentation on those things that the person really needs to hear in order to make a purchase from you. And so spending the time up front, as you'll see later on, is really going to make a big difference as we get down to closing the sale. Next is assessing needs. So in the relationship model, it's all about asking questions, probing, and really trying to get down on a deep level of what the customer really needs and how your product or service can help accomplish that. In the traditional model, qualifying, it's less about getting their needs and discovering their needs and more about discovering, is this actually a potential customer for me? So, you think of a door-to-door salesperson coming up and saying, are you the homeowner? It's not about really just determining, does this person need my product, but more about, can this person buy my product? So a very big difference there. Next, when we get into the presentation with the traditional model, we're really looking at focusing on selling the benefits. And because we've spent the time at the beginning getting to know what the customer really needs, now instead of going through every single feature our product has, we take maybe one or two of those that really highlight and really solve a customer's need and really focus on those few features that are really going to benefit that particular customer, but also getting beyond the features and talking about, okay, here's a feature, here's how it solves your need. Here's a feature, here's how it solves your need. And here's how this product or service is really going to help you. In the traditional model, you're just kind of going through your features, right? So you kind of think, right, of this very, very large Swiss Army knife, right? It has a ton of features, it has a ton of tools in it. And a lot of times the products and services you're selling are like that. They have a lot of tools and different things you can cover. In the traditional model, you just start going through every single one of those. Whereas in the relationship model, you're only focusing on those two or three tools or features that are really important to the customer. Lastly, we're talking about getting commitment. And if you remember the pyramid and the inverted pyramid, in the relationship model, you're only spending about 10% of your time here closing. And this is because if you've done the work properly at the beginning, by the time we get to the close, you don't have to spend a lot of time here because you've already figured out what the customer needs and you've shown them in a very direct way how your product or service can fit those needs. And so at the end, you're only spending a little bit of time maybe reassuring, answering questions, but at this point, you're pretty confident and they're pretty confident that this is a product that they're going to need because you've spent the time understanding their needs at the beginning. In the traditional model, you haven't spent a lot of time identifying those needs, and so by the time you get to the close, that's where all of the objections start coming out. And that's where all of the things that you should have found out in the traditional model at the beginning start coming out. And so that's why in the traditional model, it takes a lot longer to actually get a close. So just to recap, then the relationship model of selling, you're spending a lot more time building trust and rapport and probing and asking questions at the beginning so that at the end, closing the sale becomes really easy because you focus on those things that they really need. In the traditional model, you come in, you just start going through your pitch, and then at the end, that's where some of these things start coming up. So what we're going to be talking about in this class, we're going to really be focusing more on the relationship model of selling, although it is important to realize in some cases, the traditional sales model is probably still pretty appropriate. You think of door-to-door sales. I don't want somebody coming up, knocking on my door, and spending 15 minutes trying to buddy up with me. If they're here to sell me something, I usually want them to just go through and start telling me what they're here for. So, you think about some situations where the traditional sales model might still be appropriate, although in this class, we are going to focus more on the relationship model of selling, which is what most professional sales jobs are going to require.